morning.
Good morning.
Good morning, everyone. So, what a great lead-in just now from the talk from Bill, and really hearing sort of what's setting an agenda for the day. And I was thinking just now, you were referred to both as rock stars, but as we were back there, I was thinking about the two of you as a force and a catalyst for this movement, circular economy and cradle-to-cradle thinking. We're three organizations, the Schmidt Family Foundation, the MacArthur Foundation, and the Cradle Products Innovation Institute. But we share one vision and one course of work, and collaboration is really at the heart of that. So Ellen, I wanted to open up really to ask you, what is it that is the work that you feel so pulled and called to around building a circular economy, and what is the work of the MacArthur Foundation today?
Well, the goal of the MacArthur Foundation is very simple. Our goal is to accelerate the transition towards a circular economy. And we began in September 2010 when we launched. And one of the first things that we did as an organization was we tried to look at the economics. We wanted to understand if you shift from that linear economy that Bill spoke about, where you take a material, you make something out of it, and ultimately that material gets thrown away, it reaches its end of life. If you look at that as a model and you make it more efficient, what's the economic value? Well, it gets smaller because you're trying to eke out a little bit more benefit of that linear system. If you shift to a circular system where by design it's restorative, it's regenerative, it's technical materials in one cycle, it's biological materials in another, what's the value of that? And that's what we tried to understand at the foundation. Right at the beginning, we went to McKinsey and we did our first economic analysis saying, what is this worth the economy? And our first study was looking at Europe. And we've now done, I think, 6 reports looking at the economic rationale in India, in Europe, global around FMCG. We do work on plastics, we do work in education, we work with business, cities, regions, and governments, because circular economy is that systemic change. It's shifting the whole system. It's not changing one product or one material, but it's that product and material that sits within the bigger system and creating those global flows. And so for us, where we came at the beginning was to say, what is the economic rationale for this? What's this worth? And actually that has helped to drive huge momentum, not just with cities, regions, governments, World Economic Forum, but also big corporates who say, this unlocks more value. This is worth more to our business. If we can valorize these flows, if we're able to recover materials, but also remanufacture, resell the same product. There's some great examples of that within the fashion industry. Actually, if we can shift the system in its entirety, what is that worth to us? And all the economic rationale that we have and the studies that we've done with McKinsey and others say, actually, this is worth more. Circular beats linear.
So you believe that this framework is not only relevant to fashion, but critical?
I think circular economy is critical to the global economy. Right now, our economy is predominantly linear. We take a material out of the ground, we make something out of it, and at the end of the life of that product, the majority gets thrown away. Look at the fashion industry. 80% gets landfilled. It's a very high figure. Take the car industry. There are still materials, despite the high regulation, that get landfilled. We have an economy which is linear that we're trying to improve a bit, but that's never going to win in the long term, because we're still going to run out in the end. We're based on finite materials. We have 3 billion new middle-class consumers. We have a fashion industry we just heard, which is pretty much due to double in the next few years. So actually, we have finite stocks which we need to use in a different way. And no matter what part of the economy you look at, it could be agriculture and fertilizer. It's a finite material when you talk about mining. It could be the car industry. It could be the fashion industry. It could be the plastic packaging industry. If it's a linear flow, it's never going to win in the long term. So I think the global economy has a huge opportunity. There's a challenge in making it happen, but there's a massive opportunity to be restorative and regenerative, to switch from extractive and consumptive to being restorative and regenerative. It's an incredibly positive model.
Excellent. So Wendy, you have been, as I said, catalyst and force with renewable energy, ocean science, food and agriculture. Why this? Why the circular economy? Why did you get involved? Why are you in it?
I should tell you how I met Ellen. It's the same way I met Bill McDonough. I made a cold call. We started the Schmidt Family Foundation in 2006, and we wanted to look at the wiser use of energy and natural resources in a century where we have so much more information about what we're doing. And to Ellen's point, you can't change a system that is based on a premise that is false. When our industries began 100 years ago, 120 years ago, resources were limitless. Energy was cheap. Labor was cheap. There were all sorts of reasons for the ways our industries have developed. And if we look at them today, we understand the finiteness of the planet. I believe we need 1.7 planets right now just to keep up with the demand that we've created. We have to start looking at the way we make things, to Bill McDonough's point, differently. Remake the way we make things. I read that book in 2004, and I called Bill up in 2006 when we'd started the foundation and said, I'm getting a group of religious leaders together to sit with a bunch of Stanford scientists this weekend to learn about climate change, because they don't understand what the response might be. And we got Bill to come to San Francisco, and we've been engaged ever since. He came to Nantucket, where I spend summers with my family, in 2009. We had just renovated an old bookstore, making it new again. And we decided we'd give a copy of Bill's book free with purchase to everybody who came into the store for the summer. And he gave a wonderful talk. And I remember sitting in my boathouse with Bill, and he said, I'm thinking about this idea of an institute. What if the cradle-to-cradle methodology that we think about using right now, and he was using in his own business, could be given to the public as a nonprofit kind of enterprise where everyone in every industry could come and share a library of safe chemicals, safe materials. I said, that sounds like a pretty good idea, Bill. We have search engines now. We have technologies that allow us to share data, and we believe open sharing of data generally makes everybody smarter and better. I think that's a pretty good idea. So in 2010, the Institute began. I sat there as the first board chair, and we developed the methodology. We're in our 7th year now. Louis is, of course, the president of the Institute. And the fashion industry came to our attention a few years ago as one of the most complex industries, the most layered, the most difficult in terms of discovering supply chains and materials. And the Fashion Positive initiative began to address this group and to say, let's bring you into this circle. We can look at every kind of industry out there. At the Schmidt Family Foundation, as you said, we look at renewable energy and how to advance that. We look at sustainable agriculture and a system, again, look at a parallel to fashion. This industry has grown enormously since World War II, but we're at the point where we're destroying our soil and we're creating foods that are unhealthy for people. We have to re-examine the system and go back to its basic design principles. And we also have to layer into these analyses the human rights component. What happens to people in the systems? And how do we give people a better life, a better income? It's all connected to us, and I love working with Ellen. We do a fellowship program together that takes graduate students and mentors together in university to help create products for the circular economy, whether that's a methodology, whether it's a material. There's all kinds of discovery that we get to make starting now if we work towards a circular economy.
Excellent. Well, and I think that one of the things that I was hearing you say, too, about some of the early discussions with Bill around having a materials library, making this public, really the case of making all of this work open source and collaborative. So, Ellen, tell me a little bit about how the foundation is really working towards sort of collaboration and some of the products that you guys are developing in terms of tools and programs to help guide this industry.
Well, it's quite interesting. When we created the foundation, as I said, we work in education with the fellowship program. We work with business, cities, regions, and governments. And we also worked on analysis and insight. They were our first 3 pillars. And then about 3 years ago, we were sitting at the World Economic Forum with McKinsey, and we were saying, if you have the convening power of the World Economic Forum, who can pretty much bring anyone together, the analysis provided by McKinsey, the idea of a circular economy, how could you actually shift the needle? Physically shift the needle from a materials flows perspective. And we looked at many different materials flows throughout the world, and we felt that actually one of the hardest ones, which needed the stalemate to be cracked, if you like, was plastic packaging. And we said, plastic packaging is a huge industry, 78 million tons a year. We wanted to understand the flows of plastic packaging first, before we could even decide what could be done to try and solve some of the questions that lie within that industry, which is, high volume, low value, incredibly fragmented. And actually what we wanted to do initially was work with the experts on global material flows of plastic packaging. And we searched, and actually we couldn't find one organization that had a handle on those global flows. So it really set us back a year, and we did a year of analysis with McKinsey looking at the flows of plastic packaging. And what was really interesting was how staggering the numbers were. Everyone involved in that project was staggered by the numbers, that only 2% of 78 million tons actually gets recycled into the same quality plastic. 8% gets downcycled, 32% just leaks out into the environment, the oceans, the fields, the environment within which we live, even the cities, block sewage systems at great cost. So the numbers were really staggering. But the process that we went through with the new plastics economy wasn't just to say, let's write a report, but it was to say, because plastic packaging is completely international, it's completely globalized, it's incredibly fragmented. If you actually want to shift the plastic packaging industry to go from linear to circular, you're not going to do that by cleaning up the beaches. That's essential because there's a lot of litter on the beaches. There's a lot of litter in the sea. But actually you need to change the system because the volumes, like the fashion industry, are going up continuously. We are getting faster and faster and faster and better and better and better at using this product. And it does a superb job of keeping a chicken fresh for 4 days or packaging your 5-pair pack of pants or keeping your socks in a plastic bag. It does a great job, but it's not designed, as Bill says, for the end of its life. In fact, it has an end of life, which is the exact problem. And so we said the only way you can actually fix this is if you change the system. If you go right to the beginning, where all of this is designed, where it's produced, where it's manufactured, the legislation, you get the biggest retailers, the biggest plastic manufacturers, the chemical companies, the waste pre-processors, the cities, regions, governments that have to sort this material. If you get everyone in the room and you look at this as a challenge, can you actually start to shift the lever by getting a tipping point, by getting enough organizations to change the way they produce that plastic packaging so it can be valorized? It's between 90 and 120 billion US dollars worth of plastic packaging are lost from the economy every year by value. The plastic has a value, 90 to 120 billion, and then nothing, because it's not designed to be valorized. If you can design that plastic packaging to be valorized, it will be valorized. One of the images I use in a presentation is a boy in a boat in Indonesia. He's literally sitting on a sea of plastic. You can't see the water. It's just a sea of plastic. Yet he's pulling out drinking straws from the water because they have value. He knows they have value. Now, if we can change the entire plastic packaging system so that plastic packaging is designed to have value, and from the latest study we brought out at the World Economic Forum, that's 30% of plastic packaging, which really is not going to be economically viably recyclable in its current state because it's multi-film, it's complex, it's small format packaging. If you could redesign, for example, that 30% and make 50% recyclable, clearly recyclable and valorizable, and 20% reusable, then actually you can completely change the plastic packaging industry. And we aim currently for 10%. Can we shift 10% of that industry? We've got 2% so far. We have the organization signed up, just under 50 senior executives and chief executives of some of the biggest corporations in the world in this industry, signed up to the new plastics economy work. And actually, we've had some really difficult meetings, not really knowing what to do when we set out 3 years ago. We're going to go and try and shift the plastic packaging industry. How are we going to do that? We all sat in a room trying to work that out. Nobody had the answer, but no one left the room. Even after the difficult meetings, no one left the room. And actually, when we produced the first report looking at those numbers, there was an even bigger reason not to leave the room because the statistics showed after 40 years of persistently trying to do an amazing job with recycling, the volumes are going up and the recycling rates compared to the entire volume are going down. So it's failing. 2% is not good enough. So everyone's in the room and it's getting that mass to try and shift the needle.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Wendy, you've been a part of the new plastics economy work too, and I just want to kind of get your perspective on that and how it also relates to sort of what's next for this industry.
Well, I wanted to remark, just thinking when you were speaking, Ellen, I was sitting in some working groups this week here in Copenhagen, and you were at this sort of inflection point inside the fashion industry. Everybody's a little bit disrupted. Everybody's a little nervous about what's coming next, right? The customers are changing. The demands are changing. Everybody's aware of the issues about consumption and overproduction. But in those rooms, there are people who are sitting in this room today, senior executives in some very large companies, who are dealing with the very toughest questions. It's exactly what Ellen said. Looking at the supply chain, who are those suppliers? What are their processes? Can we agree that as an industry, we're going to champion those things? We're going to share data transparently across our channels rather than looking at an industry in terms of its vertical integration where everybody's got a silo and everybody's got their R&D and their secret recipe and sauce. That's great. But maybe in today's shared information technology era, it makes more sense to create libraries that are searchable by everybody. Secret sauces are still going to be there, but at least you've set the menu correctly so that the ingredients on the list are good ones. Go ahead.
I'm just going to pick up on that. I think that's the collaboration element is absolutely vital as to creating a standard, the industry standard. How are we going to recover these materials? And we found, when you start to look at fibers, as we're doing now at the foundation, as fibers is going to be the kind of the second new plastics economy, you realize there are companies out there, H&M with the take-back scheme, Eileen Fisher takes back as well, Nike with the Nike Grind, bringing back their products. Once you get your product back, it sounds crazy, but you realize what you can process and what you can't. If everything you make you sell, you don't see it back. It's great. Everything's great. You're making these wonderful products that make people look beautiful, which is what fashion is all about, but they're gone. And actually, once you create that loop, you start to see this is completely valorizable. This isn't. How do we deal with this? And actually, as a company on your own, even if you're the size of H&M or Nike, you can't necessarily reprocess that product on your own. You need the mass. You need the industry standard. You need that material to be collected by many organizations, to come back into the system through many organizations and companies, so it can be identified and valorized. And the innovations we need in chemicals, reprocessing, or materials science, or what question are we asking the people that make that product? What question are we asking the people in the supply chain? Are we asking them for that specific material that fits that industry standard? And I think it becomes all about innovation and creativity and rethinking. What does success look like here? There is a restorative and regenerative model, which is all about looking back through the supply chain and collaboration.
And it sounds like a revolution when you talk about it that way. And if you think about where other industries have gone, when I was starting out in my career, let's say 35 or 40 years ago, computers were the size of this room. And now you're carrying in your mobile device more power than sent men to the moon. And you just take it for granted.
Your watch.
In your watch. Things have changed so fast. And those technologies are in their infancy now. When you think about 3D printing, you think about the way it's easy to work with people at long distances, the telecommunications revolution. We are going to see so many of these effects ripple through every kind of industry, and certainly the fashion industry is going to be one of them. And the way we even think about producing products for customers is going to change. So it's a great time for innovation, for thinking about these questions, and at the same time solving the problems of the old system, which were never intended to be as bad as they were. I love movies from the 1930s and 40s, and I watched one on the flight coming over here, and it's 1935. It was called Roberta, and it was based on a musical that was on Broadway. Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers, lots of great dancing. And there's a French atelier where the story takes place. There's a seamstress, there's designers, there's these beautiful women who are models, and the way you bought an outfit in 1935, you went to the atelier, you watched the models walk by, and you said, I like that ensemble, I like that one. And they made it for you, okay? Pretty much direct. At that time, there were 2 billion people on the earth. What percentage of those people went to France and shopped in ateliers? Not very many. In 60 years' time since that movie was made, the population on the planet tripled to 6.1 billion people by 2000. And now we're pushing 8 billion. There are different projections about where we're going to go, but to think about the pressure on resources that is represented simply from the middle of the 20th century on. So I like to think this is the 21st century, and we have new tools, new technologies, new ways of knowing things, whether you're doing ocean research, whether you're inventing new materials. There's an accelerator factor going on right now. And when we started the Schmidt Ocean Institute in 2009 and launched a research vessel in 2012 called Falkor, the condition we had for use of that ship, because ship time is really at a premium for researchers, it's hard to have, we said we will allow you to use this ship, all of its state-of-the-art facilities, robotics, analysis, et cetera, if you agree to share your data transparently in real time. And the first initial reaction from the scientific community was, huh? Somebody's going to steal my data. Why would I want to share it in real time transparently? A real challenge to the paradigm. But the reality is, No one has stolen any data. We've had more than 500 scientists on the ship in the last 5 years, creating a community of practice that is accelerating the pace of scientific research in the ocean. Because why shouldn't you and I know the same basic things? It makes each of us better. And so I make this argument to you all as well about the collaboration that could take place in this industry to greatly accelerate the transformation that we're talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, Ellen.
I think the technology element is really important. When we look at the acceleration of circular economy around the world, which is, appears to be exponential, so much of that is down to access over ownership, and the screen in your hand allows you to access things that we could have never accessed before. The Ubers, the Airbnbs. We don't have all the solutions for these huge companies as they expand so quickly, but what we can see is it offers a better product for less money. It works for the consumer. You see the Le Totes, the Netflix of clothes. You see Nike with their Easy Kicks for kids, whereby you need 3 pairs of trainers a year because the kid grows so fast and they're just part of a system. They go back to Nike. This is made so much easier because we have the technology. And it's not to say everything is going to be access over ownership when it comes to clothing, but that's definitely one channel which is accelerating quickly. We're seeing changes in these areas, and I think technology is one of the main drivers of that.
And technology implies transparency. I think that's another element of what you're describing here. People can look for things, they can search, they
Absolutely.
can find out things. Nobody wants to be United Airlines with people with a camera catching what happened there. That's what happens today, though.
Yeah.
You got to be transparent, and you want to do that. I think the customers out there value that honesty and that notion that you are struggling to make these things different.
Yeah, and this is great. You guys are easy to lead because you're bringing on.
You could go. You could
don't
go.
even have to. But you and I have been talking all week about sort of technology and the information age, and I think that one of the things you're supporting us in doing also is building a material database around sharing this, and we're working with Google as well on developing that, partnering with MacArthur Foundation and creating some tools out of that work too. And I think the point is, it's not only collaboration, but it is about open source, and it's about making this available. Sustainability is not the piece to compete on, right? That's the piece to collaborate on. And I just think both of you could probably speak a little bit towards that as well, too, and sort of what you're seeing with this work and the call for collaboration around it.
Well, as I said, I was sitting in these working group meetings. You were hosting the one yesterday, and there was an enormously open attitude among the executives in that room about solving this problem. I think because, as I said, the transparency aspect is present to people. The market is shifting in ways that are unknown. I'll tell you a sort of parallel example. I was at a food conference in San Francisco a year ago in May. There were about 500 people from all over the food industry. And I had been sort of studying up and reading about the latest news. I had to open the conference and give a little talk. And I get my environmental news from the business section. So I was reading the Wall Street Journal and found out one of the largest vertically integrated food manufacturers and distributors in the United States had recently made a decision to downsize its headquarters. It had made a decision to re-examine its product offerings in light of a shift in consumer demand. I thought, that's very interesting. I wonder what shift they're talking about. Well, the shift they're talking about is playing out now. In another report I just read last week, February to February, in 1 year, the food industry in the United States, our supermarkets particularly, have noticed a shift in what people are buying. And here's the market signal. It's a 0.4% shift away from packaged foods, pre-prepared packaged things, and growth, balancing that out on the other side, 4 and 5% growth in fresh prepared foods, fruits, vegetables, fresh meats. I thought, what's happening here? That little bit of a market signal is enough to trigger these large companies in large industries to wonder what is going on in the marketplace and to think, in fact, how am I going to get these people back into the packaged foods? Are they figuring out they're not good for you? What's going on here, right? So the idea is to say, pay attention to where things are moving.
Yeah.
In the fashion industry, I suspect it's the same kind of signal that people can see and wonder, are we right? The doubt is growing.
And
right?
getting ahead of that consumer
Get
piece,
ahead of it.
because right now the work of both of our organizations and the support that Schmidt Family Foundation is giving us is a lot around the materials, making the case, the fibers, really working from a B2B perspective as well too. I mean, we're working with Cradle to Cradle as the qualification or the verification of a circular economy, because it's not only safe materials that can be perpetually cycled, but also made with positive impact in the way they're produced. And so, Ellen, you touched a minute ago on New Fibers economy. Can you say something more about that as the next phase follow-up to New Plastics economy?
I'd say, at the foundation, we have learned a huge amount working on the New Plastics economy.
Yeah.
How complicated it is, but actually also how necessary it is to really change the system. And the only way to change the system, as Wendy said, is to collaborate. And I think there are certain industries that we see, take aviation engines, from the plane that you travel here on if you've come on a plane. Most of those are powered by the hour. So actually, the airline doesn't own the engines, it's a provision of service. Now, if you're Rolls-Royce, you can probably pretty easily do that on your own. You can provide the engine as a service, you know what's in it, you remanufacture it. There are engines flying in planes that are 30 years old that are perfectly serviceable because they're maintained. Now, that's an example of circular economy whereby you have a cycle of materials, you've provided something as a service, which as a company you can pretty much do on your own. You may need metal reprocessing and foundries to recover the materials themselves, but you can do it on your own. Take the New Plastics economy, that's very different. It's high volume, fragmented. You can make a plastic anywhere in the world, sell it anywhere in the world. Different sorting systems, different collection systems, no sorting systems, no collection systems. That needs collaboration because even the biggest plastics producer in the world can't crack this. They're a couple of %, for example, of the global economy. And the fashion industry is no different. There are elements of circularity within the fashion industry that you can begin to do on your own. And the business model change is one example of that. Le Tote with the Netflix of clothes, those clothes are guaranteed to go back to them. That then makes them think differently about what's within the materials because they would like to valorize them because they have them back. That cycle is being created. But there's also the much broader fashion challenge of, there are a lot of items of clothing that are sold. We don't know where they go. We don't trace them. We don't track them. They're made of multiple materials. They're made of, some have toxic chemicals in the processing. Some have toxic chemicals probably in them on our bodies because the regulation is not global. The regulation is also fragmented. And pretty much anyone, I could make clothing and sell it if I wanted. Not that that's been one of my main goals, but it just shows it's so fragmented. So the New Plastics economy for us has been a really big learning curve and incredibly successful in that we now have a significant percentage of that industry signed up to say, yes, this needs to change. We don't have all the answers, but we do have the analysis that says 20% of plastic packaging should be reusable, 50% of plastic packaging should be designed so it can be absolutely recycled and valorized economically, and then 30% of that packaging that exists today, that needs to be redesigned because that system just isn't going to work economically. It's small format. Yep. It's exactly the same approach that we need within the fashion industry.
Absolutely.
We can't say they're the same, and we're not experts in fashion at the foundation, nor were we experts in plastics when we began the New Plastics economy. But there is a real need for an understanding of the system, of organizations which play within the system, and not just the brands themselves, but the fiber manufacturers, the fiber reprocessors, many of who are here. Mm-hmm. It needs that dialogue around the table with everyone talking together about what that dialogue mechanism is absolutely essential. And that's what we are intending to start with a new fibers initiative, which we're launching this autumn. The first report, looking at all the numbers, trying to understand the economics as we did with the previous report with the New Plastics economy. And we're already working with H&M, with Nike, with the CNA Foundation, with Fashion Positive, the Danish Fashion Institute, Sustainable Apparel Coalition, and it's already underway. So
that's excellent. Well, when you came out with the statistic that if we don't change, we're going to have more plastic in the ocean than fish by 2050. You hear that, and it's like, so I'm looking for what is that statistic that's going to come out of the report that's going to not only catalyze this room, but everyone out there. Wendy, final thoughts?
I wanted to just mention the role of education in all of this. I think the MacArthur Foundation has done an outstanding job in always bringing education at every level, secondary school and beyond, into this conversation, because the next generation of people who will run industry need to be trained. They need to understand the systematic thinking and what the circular economy is all about. The Schmidt MacArthur Fellowship Program that I might have mentioned earlier, is one way to create a cohort of young people coming through university, faculty members who are schooled in the circular economy, who could develop curriculum, who could understand this body of practice and bring it into our industries, both as interns and eventually as executives in the companies. So it's very important for us, all of us, to think about how do we spread the word about this and how do we embed this kind of thinking in the systematic education of young people.
And for them, it's all about what you can do, not what you can't. The faster you do it, the better. The moment they get it, likewise with the universities, it's the way forward.
Yeah, it's like a light goes on. It was when I read Cradle to Cradle, a light went on. If there's anybody here who hasn't read it, you've got to read it, because it changes the way you think about everything you touch, everything you see. You start to ask the question, why is this way? And that's the starting point for creativity and innovation.
Excellent. Before our Academy Award music starts to play, as we leave, one sentence, what do we want from this room? What are we asking this room to do in regards to our work?
I'm really excited about the idea that the organizers of this event have actually asked for a commitment from people here. There are a lot of conferences and they can be interesting, but if people don't come out of them committed to doing something, you haven't used the energy in the room. So I'm excited to see what happens here.
Excellent. Ellen?
I'd say work out what success looks like, and we can do that, and then collaborate to make it happen.
Great. Thank you both. Yeah. Thank you.